Welcome back, AI Explorers, to this episode in our podcast here at Ingenuity AI. Today, we're going to be speaking with Justin Simpson, who is the co-founder of Here Now AI. It's a platform dedicated to making artificial intelligence practical and accessible for non-technical users. There's a trusted weekly newsletter boasting more than 23,000 subscribers. Justin provides easy-to-understand insights about AI tools that can enhance productivity, creativity, and everyday life. We hope that you enjoy listening to Justin and what he has to bring to the AI conversation with us today.
Hi, Jacob. Hi, Warren. Nice to meet you. There you go. I can
Nice
hear
to
you
meet
fine.
you. We're very excited to talk to you.
Yeah, super. I look forward to it. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no
Thank
worries.
you for joining us.
We're excited. We've been kind of looking through your materials, your resume. What got you started in artificial intelligence?
So, for a lot of my career, I was doing sort of financial mathematics, financial engineering, derivatives, that sort of stuff, which had overlap in terms of some of the mathematics, machine learning, and what have you, with what came later in AI, although at a much lower level and a slower speed. But when the Gen AI revolution broke out, I immediately felt comfortable in it. But I also knew that, as I had during my career in banking, that there would be a lot of difficulty in adoption and understanding because it was something new and different. Even though with natural language, it should be easy for everybody to dive in. It's not always the case, and new things bring fear. So I sort of realized that I had two things to do. The one was a sort of mission to make sure that people aren't left behind if I can, that they understand that this is a very liberating, a very democratizing technology if it's used correctly. And the second was to see if I could be helpful in terms of thinking about how to apply it and how to get benefit out of it. So the two parts to that are starting a newsletter, which now has 20,000 subscribers, that every week tries to do not great things about new models or underlying technology, but how do you use AI? What things can I do today? And I should do today to experiment with it, to understand the technology. And the second is talking to mainly small and medium-sized businesses, community groups, chambers of commerce about how AI can help them.
We want to talk about all of those topics with you. Hopefully, we have time to get to them all. But if I could ask, so for me, I consider myself to be fairly tech savvy. I'm not a developer, but I do some coding, understand HTML, CSS, some PHP, some Python, those kinds of things. By no means a pro. But I consider myself a technical user for a computer. And I have noticed as well that, particularly with children, this is always the case, they seem to take to technology very quickly, but to ChatGPT in particular, they get it. It's very easy for them to use. And so how do you approach this topic that you mentioned of empowering non-technical users, of helping people who might, you said, you don't want them to get left behind. And I think that is important. This technology seems so accessible. It seems easy. So what considerations are in your brain as you think about that?
So I think that when we talk about the technology being accessible or easy, and by the way, I agree with you, there are many, many people for whom it's not. And that's strange to us. And this is one of the things that I'm concerned about. I call it the AI divide, is that a smaller and smaller group of people are rushing on this train that's going faster and faster and faster, and people who have not yet delved in are finding themselves challenged because the technology is developing so quickly. So, for example, um, folk would say, "Oh, I looked at ChatGPT once, and it wasn't a very satisfactory experience." And when you ask them about it, they treated it like a Google search, and they got out a Google search answer or a mediocre piece of language, and didn't really engage with it, as you know. We know that we should, as a conversation where it's shaped and improved. And so, based on that one experience, they don't think it's very good for them, and therefore they sort of glaze over when the other stuff comes out. And I think that the way I try to engage, and by the way, your point about children is exactly correct, because they have no fear. And so, if we can get adults in various groups to put aside their fear and pick up the fun factor like a child might, it's a lot easier. So the way I do that, for example, in a group that is that I believe not comfortable with with AI would be to have a conversation with the latest ChatGPT release in which you can have a very engaged conversation, interrupt it, run over it, change topic, challenge it, say, speak in a funny voice, whisper, or all these other things, just to give them an idea that there's there's
Yeah,
something going
they
on.
could do all of that.
And it exactly, and then if there's time, the other one which I think is remarkable is Notebook LM from Google, in which I can challenge someone on the fly to give me a topic, pick up a website, load it up, and have that podcast. And of course, you can now interrupt the podcast and say, "Oh, we've got a question from a member of the audience here," and ask it a question. And I think that's a fantastic and powerful demonstration. Then hopefully you've got some of their attention. And I try to make it context relevant. So I spoke, for example, to an investment group that are a bunch of very high-powered, mostly women who are no longer full-time involved in their careers, get together and pool some money and try to stay current on what's going on in the markets. And I used these features to have a very interesting discussion about the value of NVIDIA and whether that stock was too high. And of course, it's something that they talk about every week. So cracking the nut of the powerful technology plus the relevance to something that's deeply personal to them sort of was the way that I got into that group.
I when you talk about fears related to adults using AI, how are you working with them to combat those fears, and what are those fears that they feel when they engage with ChatGPT or any other AI platform?
It's a good question, and I don't really, not being a psychologist, don't really have a good explanation. But for example, usage skews heavily in young people and then lower and lower as you get higher up the age spectrum. And usage skews male to female almost 2/3 to 1/3. I find no excuse for that or no understanding because it's such an easy and accessible technology. It's not as if you have to translate it to some old school roll up your sleeves and get grease on your hands technology where you might understand some of those. But I think there's a combination of anything that's new being challenging to certain people, and then there's also coupled to this wow factor of what we can use today is somehow an existential fear about what AI brings in the future. And because there's quite a lot of kind of, I call it alarmist media about how we're all going to be eaten by an AI, I think those things somehow might become mixed up.
Yeah, Jacob and I have talked a lot about the optimism front and the pessimism front of AI, and where we're trying to find that balance. I personally like to see the Star Wars, Star Trek version of AI, where we're currently and constantly using it in our daily lives to create tasks, to complete tasks, and do a lot of things. And we were just talking about folding laundry with AI this morning.
Yes.
Before we got on with you. From your perspective, what do you see is the future of AI and how it will be used in business and in our personal lives?
I'm an optimist. I'm very much in that optimist camp, and I don't deny that there are disruptions coming. And so I want everybody, as many people as possible, to think intentionally about those disruptions where they fit into their lives. So I have a view that my life already is made much easier by using AI. There's certain AI tools that I've adopted. Sometimes things that I've written up for the newsletter and then said, "Wow, that was actually quite cool. I think I'll start using that." And I can mention a couple of those if you like. But so my personal life is better. And I'm helping, hopefully, in some of these business conversations to make small businesses in particular better because of this democratizing power, where a small businessman might say, "Oh gosh, this technology is for the big guys. It's for the IBMs of the world, not for me, 2 or 3 person team." I say, "No, actually, it's the other way around. For you, it's a marketing department, a sales department, a customer service department, all of which you can run without hiring extra people or doing much extra work." So I think the powerful positives are already there. And I don't deny that there's certain things that are going to be disrupted. If I ran a call center business, I'd have to be thinking quite hard about how uh, to look at the next few years, because I think that's one of the industries that's ripe for disruption today, never mind in some sort of science fiction future. Um, but in all of these places, if you think quite carefully, I have great faith in human ingenuity and human creativity. And if you think quite carefully about that, there's generally a view in which AI can leverage the human as opposed to just replace the human. Although I don't, as I say, I don't deny that there will be jobs lost. There will be hopefully more jobs gained. And because the technology is by and large so accessible, I think that retooling can be done for not everybody, of course, but for an awful lot of folk that would be otherwise disrupted.
So one of the things that Warren and I have talked about, and have come up with several of our guests, is the importance of actually keeping humans in the loop when it comes to the usage of AI and those kinds of things. So that's a phrase that we like. One of the things, and we want to get to your perspective on how to use AI in an organization, but I just want to echo and agree with you for a second about how useful it is on an individual basis. Like you mentioned, it's a democratizing technology. It's a leveling technology. Like you mentioned, so I have my own law practice here in Virginia, and we have our own marketing department, which consists currently of one person. With ChatGPT, she's able to do the work of 2 or 3 marketers. It's nuts. Between ChatGPT and Midjourney and other tools, we're creating custom images and custom content and custom video. And so we see the potential. How do you help individuals see that potential to amplify their own skill sets and recognize, hey, this technology actually helps me be on a more level playing field with some of these larger players?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it sort of starts in how well individuals understand their own businesses. And so you say, I'm a lawyer. We'd start with the fact that you understand the law and its application, perhaps in a specialized segment, but you also have some sense for everything from how I identify a client, how I bring that client in, how I onboard them, how I deal with them in a legal sense, and then how I bill them and follow up with them and make them an ongoing client. So that there's this whole stream. And if you're able to articulate that, then through a process of discussion and a little bit of workshopping, it's easier to identify where are the places, the pain points, if you like, that you'd love to solve, and start there. So I tend to start by saying AI doesn't solve everything, nor should it, but it can solve places along the way. And if you can identify where it hurts most, let's start there. And then there are the other side of it, and you being in law will understand this particularly, but it's true for a number of other types of business activities. Where should you not use AI? And if you're
Yes.
you're preparing a brief to file in court, you want to be quite careful about how you use AI, lest you should be like this chap, which I don't know if it's a true story or an apocryphal story. I didn't see it actually cited, but I have no I believe it's possible, of a lawyer filing a brief that had 2 citations that were completely fictitious because they were hallucinations out of ChatGPT or whatever the equivalent was. So, so identifying the areas where AI should come last, or at least there should be a lot of thought given to guardrails around it, versus the idea that you can really maximize your productivity in your marketing department is an excellent one. If you get a couple of letters wrong or words wrong in an advertisement, it's not great. You'd prefer not to, but it's probably not going to take your practice down, whereas filing something with a court that has a fictitious citation might well have different consequences.
Yeah, becomes a little more consequential.
That is definitely one of the aspects that I constantly caution people when they're using AI, is that you are the expert and you need to vet the content that it creates for you, so you don't run into problems like you're alluding to with the law brief and the citations. And both Jacob and I have found issues where we're like, that doesn't really fit. That's not really true. And we'll make that change and edit that copy, keeping us, the humans, involved in that process.
And that's you just phrased very, very clearly this idea of a human AI partnership. It's not a replacement for you, or whether we're talking about the law profession now or any other profession. It's not a replacement, it's leverage. But leverage means that what comes out at the end is your responsibility. And so it can get you there faster. Another way that I talk about it when I start these conversations is saying, okay, I'm bringing you a PhD level intern who's going to be available 24 hours a day, will never stop working, never get tired, never complain, never take leave, but doesn't know anything about your business. So garbage in, garbage out. You say, go write me an advertisement, but you don't give context about what your practice is and what sort of clients you want to attract and what your value proposition is, etc. You shouldn't be surprised when your very bright PhD intern comes back with a bunch of unusable nonsense. Whereas if you spend some time saying, I'm going to explain to my business and what I want, who I'm trying to attract, and I'll go away and think about it, you'll be much more pleased with the results.
So one of the things we've done at our firm and that I've done personally is I made training GPTs for new staff to help them get up to speed on different legal topics. Um, and that's been very helpful. There's research that shows that AI is very helpful when it comes to training. And so that's been a useful tool. But for me personally, you mentioned how it doesn't know your business. And there's this phenomena where if you tell ChatGPT, act as an expert in this certain field, then you're focusing it, right? You're telling it, hey, of all the information that you have available to you, this is where we're looking. And so I created a custom GPT and fed it my area of expertise, my level of experience, and said, act like this, to really good results. And then I was showing one of my partners and he goes, how do you do that? And also created his own. So his GPT that he uses for his personal legal reasons is different from my GPT, but they both help us in the ways that we most want it. And I think that there's definitely opportunity for customization there as people realize how they can use the tool.
I think that's exactly right. And perhaps my analogy with the PhD student is that you've got this. Your student is so bright that he or she has a PhD in 40 or 50 or 100 different areas. And so when you start off by saying, go away and solve an important problem for me, and you don't say, I want you to focus on your knowledge in mathematics or law or the English language or whatever it is, you're doing a lot of wheel spinning that's unnecessary. So this idea of GPTs is a very powerful one. And again, it's not that difficult to set up your own custom knowledge base. And you can do that within ChatGPT. You can do it within these Google tools like Notebook LM. And the one thing that's quite interesting, I don't need to, unless you'd like to turn this into a review of tools that are out there, but Claude is currently experiencing, I suppose they'll all change, but at the moment, Claude is seen as the most creative human sounding writer of the English language. And so a lot of creatives that are in that space
are heading towards Claude, less towards ChatGPT.
Exactly. And there, the process is much the same in that you can create a project in Claude and feed it your own writing. And then Claude not only knows what your subject matter is and what your expertise is, but can write in a voice that sounds quite a lot like yours. And so when you want consistency in a publication or a newsletter or something like that, it's very helpful.
Yeah, when ChatGPT first came onto the scene and was available to public, that was the very first thing that I did. I'm a marketer. And I do marketing and advertising for 20 plus years now. And so the very first thing I did was feed it all the writing samples that I could give it, my website and various other things, and said, okay, give me the voice and tone of this and other, marketing things that I needed to know. And it spit out this thing. And so now I've coalesced that together. And anytime I ask ChatGPT to write something for me, I'm like, okay, here's how I want you to write that in that perspective. So what I would love to hear some of the unique uses. You talked about this you said something about it in your newsletter. You've been doing some unique uses. I would love to hear and learn more about what unique uses you've put AI to and how it's helped you and what the results have been.
It's not so much that I have unique uses as things that I mentioned that I have found very leveraging in my daily life. I come from an era in which high-speed typing was not trained, and so I've spent my life as a two-finger hunt and peck sort of guy. And now there's a tool, for example, there's several of them, but the one that I use is called Flow, which takes everything that I say in whatever context I'm using it and puts my words into coherent English language. So it's not only dictation, but it's dictation through an AI filter. And that means that I am now able to type effectively at close to 200 words a minute, or as fast as I can speak, really. And if along the way I say and which I do, or repeat myself or correct myself, it takes all of that out and gets it pretty highly accurately. So that's a very sort of high leverage a high leverage tool. Um, and then another one, I don't know if you all experienced this, but during COVID, we learned that taking notes during Zoom meetings is hard. If while we're chatting here, I was trying to take notes of everything we were saying, I don't know about you, but I would find at the end that I had a whole lot of words written on a piece of paper, and I'd have to scratch my head by tomorrow to say what was it that we meant to cover. And so, not surprisingly, when the native AI in Zoom or some of these other tools tries to make sense of three people talking about something, and then three people, one of those three people promising to do something tomorrow, etc., it doesn't have context, much like the PhD student we were talking about, and so it comes up with stuff that's sometimes helpful, but sometimes um, garbled. And so there's a tool that I love called Granola AI, and Granola again works the way that I work. And if you happen to work this way, it's great. Is that while you're taking notes, in this case on a board that's off to the side on my second screen, I'm reminding myself of things that I want to remember, of who said what, and it fills in those notes. So it takes a transcript and then using artificial intelligence fills in the notes around the structure or the skeleton that you've given it. And so what comes out at the end is a coherent framework that actually sounds and looks useful, as opposed to some of this other AI generated sort of spaghetti.
Right. Sometimes
Tools.
you get an AI summary and it's just what? Whereas if you give it some structure, like you mentioned, garbage in, garbage out, but if you give it good framework, then you get better responses. So
yeah, exactly. And then the last one I think is worth a mention, although we can keep chatting, but that I think is something that applies in pretty much all of our lives, but I found is useful, is voice AI is now getting much better. Much better, I mean, in terms of understanding and being able to converse, and latency. So latency, this concept of latency is the speed with which an AI can respond to you. And there's a very human cutoff point in which there's a pause that sounds natural. If I pause now and then continue talking, I still sound human. But if I did that 3x that pause, you'd think, wait a minute, is this Justin I'm talking to, or did Justin send his avatar to the meeting? Because that sounded just too long. Just too long to sound persuasive. And now the technology is fast. The latency is so fast that you can have an almost natural conversation. So there's this fantastic app that goes on your phone called Simple AI. And Simple is basically your voice assistant. And so now I can say, phone, the price of eggs is ridiculous. I don't know. Out here on the West Coast, I think on the East Coast as well. So phone 10 supermarkets. Okay.
yeah.
So phone 10 supermarkets and find me the lowest price of eggs. Or something more practical, make me a restaurant reservation at such and such a restaurant sometime between 6 and 8 p.m. on Wednesday. Or phone my eye doctor and change my appointment from 4 p.m. to somewhere between 5 and 6. And all I'm doing is inputting a brief English language, natural language instruction, and off this app is going and making those phone calls. When you're on the receiving end, it's very persuasively almost human. Clear, has the ability to be interrupted. You can go back and forth and say, 6 o'clock, does that work? No. 6:30, yes. And at the end, pops an event into my calendar. And so that's A, quite fun, and B, sort of, I think, the way that the future is going, because it can make 10 calls simultaneously. If you want to find, an eye appointment at such and such with such and such a parameters, and it's a fun use case, I think, for something that we're going to see a lot more of. I don't know about you, but I would prefer, in some senses, to interact with an AI than having these frustrating customer service experiences that we've all had, where press 1. Press 2, no, press X, and go back to the beginning, as opposed to a human sounding, I want to speak to an agent about such and such, or I have this question, and just get a normal language answer.
I spent a good part of last week doing just that, sitting on customer service for some things, and was just it was very trying.
Yeah. Another example is over COVID, I needed to make some adjustments with the IRS. I could not get them on the phone. And then eventually the message changed to no one is available. And then I read another article like that the department that I was reaching to had been closed for 6 months or something like that. I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. So, when you've got no one available, yes, definitely an AI would be preferred. But like you mentioned, even when someone is available, some of these things are just administrative. I was just telling Warren that I'd read a comment the other day where someone said, I don't want AI to write for me and create art so that I have more time to do the dishes and fold the laundry. I want AI to fold the laundry and do the dishes so that I have more time to create art and write. And so when it comes to something like, a phone call to a business to coordinate something, yeah, that's administrative. I don't necessarily want that or want to talk to a human if I don't have to. I just need it done. And so there are a lot of ways. But I think this is a good segue into the other side of your area of interest, which is how organizations can incorporate artificial intelligence into what they do. And so what's your perspective on that?
So I think for anybody who had gone through large organization technology frustration, and by and large it is frustrating, that the previous paradigm was top down. The CTO would decide we're all going to have Windows 9 or 10 or 11 and then impose it downwards on the organization. And even if there were individual users who were more facile and wanted to be further and faster and doing things better, that was just what the organization did. Take a CRM system, Salesforce, top down. You have no choice but to do this. And part of the power of AI is that it's a bottom-up thing, that use cases are individually different. Everybody has their own way of approaching it. Everybody can get their own value out of it. And so you don't want to try and approach it from an organizational standpoint as a one-size-fits-all. You will use some version of ChatGPT and nothing else, and you won't use anything else. You have to try and find a balance where the organization says, okay, we're going to put in place guardrails, and one of the obvious guardrails is data protection. If you're dealing with an organization that has sensitive data of any sort, and employees are not given any sort of boundary, they'll be uploading all of your private financial information, for example, asking for analyses, and that information is now out there being used for training and potentially leaking out. And so data protection would be one. The ethical considerations and other reasons that you'd want to keep a ring-fenced garden of data. So the top-down stuff comes around thinking about what data moat we want to protect. Where might we set the boundaries of usage? And you can all imagine where we don't want people to be going in terms of experimenting with AI. And then below that, giving individuals encouragement and as much freedom as possible to find the use cases that pop up. And so whether that is letting the finance people experiment within a financial walled garden and the creative people within a creative walled garden, or different versions of that for different organizations, all in the context of saying, let's all agree what's dangerous. What do we not want to do? That's kind of the way I think organizations, the best organizations, are approaching it, versus this top-down structure, which relates to operating systems from the 80s and 90s, if you like. The way we did it is not particularly productive, because you're forcing lack of creativity onto something which by its nature enhances creativity and leverages individuals.
So one of our prior guests on the podcast, I'd say maybe a month ago, 6 weeks, his approach to AI, and I believe he has a consultancy firm where he helps organizations implement it. And his big issue was data protection, making sure that the company's sensitive data isn't used through the AI, or that access levels, permission levels. But you mentioned just now, like, one of the advantages to artificial intelligence, one of the things that makes it so potentially wonderful, is that it is more accessible to people at different levels with different needs. And you mentioned potentially using different tools, so maybe the marketing department has Claude, while the operations department has ChatGPT. But how would you practically implement that in an organization?
Yeah, I think that it's exactly as you described, that you try to work out what is the balance between allowing applications that make the most sense for particular areas to flourish versus a complete free-for-all where everybody does everything. and overall some policies around data protection and ethics. I'll give you a very good example that we've just had in the last few weeks, very, very live example, which is this revolution through the DeepSeek model release. And so in some senses that upended the world, right? We should talk about reasoning models before we finish the conversation, because I think that's such an interesting area and so important for an upcoming application that folks should know about. But anyway, this was one of those models that exhibits reasoning. It shows you how it's thinking. It does amazing stuff. And of course, it was trained at a small fraction of the cost and using a small fraction of the data of the big AI models, and therefore was seen as a bit of a revolution. So that was available in several different forms, one of which was an app. And for a while, it might still be, but was the most popularly downloaded app on the App Store. Well, that version was sending all its data back to servers in China. And we've just had in this country both houses of Congress, which don't agree on anything at all, agreeing that the TikTok app is dangerous because it's sending app back to servers on China. And so if you were using DeepSeek through the app, you needed to be comfortable that your data was being sent off into a place that there might be data risk. And I'm not saying any nefarious use was there. I have no idea about what happened once it arrived there, but it was important enough in a parallel world to ban TikTok. So if you used the app, you were getting the reasoning capability, but you were also getting a lot of data insecurity versus the model, which was then made available. You can now run, if you use the app Perplexity, which is another of those great AI chatbots that's very connected to the web, and it's kind of like a Google search with AI on AI steroids. They've now made that DeepSeek model available through Perplexity, where that data is kept on their servers in the United States. So it's not like a company that's keeping it internal to the company, but it's one step closer in that you know that your data is not being sent off to these servers in China. So that's sort of a good example about how to find that balancing. And if you take that down to the corporate level or the private level, I have just, not because I have great confidential data, but because I wanted to test the technology, have now got a version of DeepSeek running on my home computer, which doesn't allow my data to even leave my computer. So I could switch off the internet and still run DeepSeek. And so if you think about that in a corporate context, you can get the benefit of that model while still protecting your data. And it's just a question of being thoughtful and intentional about where you are on the spectrum, what you want to get out of it, and where you want to put, as I say, these moats or these firewalls.
Very cool. So you mentioned we shouldn't end this conversation without discussing, was it reasoning models? So,
Yep.
So let's go ahead and make sure we get it in.
Well, I would like to interject real quick, though, that we spoke with Jill, and she talked a lot about the reasoning aspect of AI, too. So I would love to hear what you've got to think about that and what you're seeing with that topic.
So AI reasoning is the first iteration of ChatGPT, miraculous though it was very much I ask a series of questions and I get a series of answers, one off, one off, one off, one off. And then we started thinking about prompt engineering. And we thought for a moment that there was going to be a whole new discipline of prompt engineers, which was a new career path. And 20 years later, they'd still be writing the best, most cutting edge prompts. And what they were doing was really framing the questions so that the output of the model would go through another process of analysis and then go be it back and improved and improved. And there were various techniques around that, all of which were intended to make the model provide an answer, reflect on the answer, and improve the answer. But that was the manual process, the prompt engineer or the person who was driving the model. This latest series of models that have come out called reasoning models do all that inside the model. So you can ask a very deep and complex question, and the model will take now, even though it's processing on some of the most high-powered chips on the planet, is still taking 10 or 15 or 20 minutes to come back with an answer. Why? Because it's going away and going down different trains of thought and seeing which one works. It's coming back and analyzing its own answer and saying, can I improve on that? Does that make sense? And so this idea of deep reasoning, one of the manifestations is this DeepSeek model. And if you run it on Anthropic, for example, you can actually watch it saying, well, I suppose what Justin means is I should investigate such and such. And I've gone down there. That sort of makes sense. And it actually gives you, as if it's chatting out loud, as if it's a human thinking analyst chatting out loud, gives you that text which you can follow. Not all of them do that. But they all have some version of that thinking inside. So the idea is that you can start to see, as a regular retail user, start to see the applications to much more thoughtful research, much deeper thinking. Now, often we don't need that in our lives. We're perfectly happy with ChatGPT because we really want to solve a simple problem. Help me write a blog post, or help me answer this legal question. But for things that are deeper into the scientific analysis, mathematical analysis, or reasoning analysis, these models are really quite powerful. The latest one is available from OpenAI only to those who are currently on the $200 a month Pro plan. But they're on the internet for anybody who's interested. There's some fantastic examples about the 15 to 20 page academic research that comes out of asking a single question. And soon that'll be available, I think, more broadly to anybody who has those sorts of questions.
I would also like to hear your thoughts. The reasoning is definitely a fascinating thing, and I love that it's walking through that and sharing that information of how it's thinking about it with you. That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up. But one of the things that we talk about DeepSeek as well. A friend of ours, Brian Sykes, recently in his newsletter talked about using DeepSeek and the biases involved when he asked it very querying questions about Tiananmen Square and other, kind of topics, non-orthodox topics for particular models. Now, and Jacob and I have talked a little bit about this, about biases. I think all of them have some, because humans are programming them, and we have our own biases that we inject into our own environments. So what are your thoughts on the biases, and how can we overcome them?
Yeah, I think there are two good examples of where, as you describe it, humans programming for reasons of accident or deliberately are putting things that we wouldn't want to see, biases that we wouldn't want to see, into the models. And the very first was, if you remember, when Google first released its image generation. You would ask it for a picture of the founding fathers, and you'd get a very unlikely looking group of people, and that was useful in that it forced a discussion around what we mean by diversity and how it should be represented in our society, and where are there boundaries in which it's healthy and useful, and where are there boundaries in which it's silly. And in some respects, I think this DeepSeek question that you just ascribed to did the same thing. It just reminded us of exactly what you just said. These are human models. Now, in this case, a rather clumsy, and by the way, that doesn't do much to alleviate my concern about the data that's being sent back to China if a model refuses to talk about Tiananmen Square, or name the president of China. Very happily names the president of the United States, but not, it suggests somehow that there's been quite conscious thought given to not creating offense in that particular area. But it's a good, healthy wake-up call, not so much about that, because we really don't need models to tell us what happened at Tiananmen Square. But we do need to be constantly reminded that these models are not perfect, and that there isn't an objective truth out there. There's a series of truth. Now, the sort of parallel version of that are these hallucinations that we started talking of earlier in the conversation. And I think with the same sort of process and the same rigorous logic about thinking, we'll get fewer and fewer of those. They still will be there. Bias is inherent in the training data. You've seen those stories, I'm sure, about chatbots that were trained on Twitter and became racist and xenophobic and all sorts of other things because that's what's on Twitter. So without any guardrails, they can be quite unpleasant, and we don't necessarily want that. So it's a balancing act, and these things all serve to remind us that the hallucinations are a balancing act between allowing a model to be creative and thoughtful and go to those corners that the human mind doesn't and show us value, versus making stuff up. And as you see these models improve, you see those error rates going down. And I suspect in the same way, as you see these models improve, you'll see fewer and fewer obvious examples like the Gemini image creation or the DeepSeek China version. But it's still a good lesson to us that we shouldn't assume that they're without any biases.
Yeah. Um, so talk to us for a second about your current AI project, which is Here Now AI. You mentioned that you now have 23,000 email subscribers.
So yeah, and the idea there is to take non-technical readers. I have no desire to put up a league chart of which model is faster or better, or who's spending more money on AI or anything like that. There's plenty of that news out there. It's interesting, but it's not my particular jam. I'm trying to address folk for whom this technology is new. It's not in there every day. They have professional lives doing other things, and if each week I can get each of those readers to try one new thing, then I will have succeeded. And so it's a sort of sublime and ridiculous, if you know what I mean. I try to think about the world of AI at work and what I can do to make my own life better at work. And that might be job switching, changing work, job seeking, resume enhancement, etc. It might be things that are useful, like we were just discussing in meetings, or drafting text at home. And there's a number of applications that could be used to improve your life, and at play, because I think that's an important part of it. Get anybody who hasn't tried to write a song on Suno, for example, or one of the others. Suno is my favorite, where you could just, as a non-musical person, I can say, write me a country ballad with a lyric about artificial intelligence, and it comes up with something surprising. But everybody should be trying that sort of stuff, generating images as well, just to get a sense of the capabilities. And then hopefully every so often along comes something like the apps that I was describing that I use in my daily life. And you say, aha, that's really, really useful. I also occasionally cover pieces of equipment, because I think that's another place that AI is coming for us, which is going to be baked in. So I just recently bought a pair of those Ray-Ban Meta glasses, where you can walk around with what looks like a pair of Wayfarer sunglasses and actually be taking pictures or talking to it and saying, what am I looking at? Or can you translate that sign for me? Very interesting ways that AI is coming to devices, although that's not my primary focus. I do mention that from time to time. And the idea is that with 10 or 15 minutes, or even just a quick spin through, a 5-minute spin through, somebody who's non-technical would be encouraged to not be alarmed by AI, not see it as something distant or not for them, and play around with it a little bit.
Well, that's one of the things that I think a lot of people forget in their own lives generally is play. And for me, that's one of. I mean, Jacob can tell you, I like to play a lot of different things, and in fact, last week I posted about play and how I used AI, and with Jacob's help, he helped me create a scene for my Dungeons and Dragons game that I held, where like you were talking about, I used HeyGen to get the voice, so I got a voice actor for pittance on the internet. Then I used Runway to make the video. I used Midjourney to create the base image, and ChatGPT to write a script for it. And in 30 minutes, I had this great scene that my players loved and enjoyed, and I didn't have to do a lot of really intense work to come up with that. So that was fantastic. And that was just me playing with it, for play.
I'm just applauding you. I think that's fantastic. Not only did you use your creativity, you experimented with different media, if you like, within the AI space. You brought them together in a way that would have taken hours had you been trying to do it in some previous iteration, and it made the experience better for everyone. That's a fantastic example.
Exactly. And that is just a fascinating thing of it, is that you can use it for these applications. And I love how you said Suno, because one of my first interactions with Suno was having it write me a heavy metal song about puppies, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So AI has been really useful, not just for business, but for play. I do think that that's a great space to develop skills with AI, is to just play with it, just to see what it can do. And it's been a really interesting adventure. We want to thank you for coming on, Justin. Thank you for sharing. How should people follow you or find you? I mean, so I know there's the email list, but this is your chance to plug yourself and kind of talk about those things.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. My website, we chose the name Here Now AI because I wanted it to be about AI that's accessible today. So www.herenowai.com. is the website, it's the newsletter, it's a way to contact me. And hopefully, if anybody's listening, anybody that is listening is interested, please sign up for the newsletter. It's free. It's hopefully enjoyable, and maybe it'll make you experiment a little bit more with AI than you are today.
Thank you for coming on our podcast, and we're glad to know you now.
No, thank you very much for having me. Great pleasure to chat.
Well, AI Explorers, if you enjoyed this conversation with Justin, please like and subscribe for more content like this. We'll put his contact information in the description below, and we look forward to seeing you on the next iteration of Ingenuity AI.